It's quite something to think about, isn't it? We've got instant communication across the globe, but somehow the big international challenges, they feel ancient.
Yeah, like they haven't really changed much at their core.
So what if we looked back, I mean, way back, to the very beginnings of diplomacy? Could those old ways of interacting, teach us anything useful for today?
That's exactly what we're going to dig into in this deep dive. We're aiming to explore ancient diplomacy, starting from, well, the Fertile Crescent and moving through places like ancient India and other early spots.
Right, and this isn't just like a history lecture for the fun of it. We're hoping to pull out some surprising bits, maybe some nuggets of knowledge that still resonate today, shed light on how countries deal with each other.
Exactly. We've looked at some pretty interesting sources, historical analyses, ancient law codes, which are surprisingly revealing.
Oh, really? Law codes.
Yeah, and actual records of treaties, protocols between these old powers. Gives you a real feel for it.
Okay, so where do we start? The very beginning.
Let's start right at the dawn, maybe the 4th millennium BC. The Fertile Crescent, often called the cradle of civilization, right?
Right.
This was a time of massive change in how people lived, a really fundamental shift.
You mean moving away from hunting and gathering, settling down, farming, that kind of thing?
Precisely. A total game changer. People started farming, domesticating animals, building permanent places to live. And that's where you see the very first hints of, well, states emerging.
Okay, so settled life creates new problems or opportunities.
Both, really. Suddenly you have neighbors, permanent neighbors. You need ways to interact, ways to manage things between communities.
And diplomacy starts to bubble up from that need.
That's the idea. You need to communicate, share knowledge, maybe establish some rules. Predictability becomes important. And crucially, writing develops around this time.
Ah, writing. That must have been huge.
Absolutely massive. And that you could send messages reliably, record agreements, pass knowledge down, and sort of laid the tracks for those first proper diplomatic exchanges between settlements.
Okay, fascinating start. Now, you mentioned Hammurabi's code earlier. Most people just think eye for an eye, harsh justice.
Right, the famous bits.
But you said there were diplomatic ideas tucked away in there. That sounds unexpected.
It really is interesting when you look closer. Yes, the code lays out laws and punishments, but it also shows a ruler really focused on clear rules and making sure people were accountable.
Okay.
And those are fundamentally diplomatic goals, aren't they? Just applied within his kingdom first. It's about managing relationships and expectations.
Can you give an example? What's a diplomatic angle in Hammurabi's laws?
Well, take the famous law about builders. If a building collapsed and killed someone, the builder could face death themselves.
Ouch. Harsh accountability.
Extremely harsh, yes. But think about the principle behind it. It wasn't just punishment. It was about ensuring people had serious skin in the game, as we might say today. Real consequences for shoddy work.
So aligning incentives, making sure everyone involved cared about the outcome.
Exactly. It's a very ancient example of risk management and ensuring accountability. And that principle, it's timeless in diplomacy and international agreements. You need mechanisms to ensure everyone upholds their end.
So setting clear rules, clear consequences,
Yeah.
that creates predictability, which you're saying is key for diplomacy, whether inside a state or between states.
Precisely. And another thing Hammurabi did was try to communicate these laws clearly. He had them inscribed publicly. That commitment to clear communication, making the rules of engagement known, is just vital in any negotiation, ancient or modern.
Okay, let's shift gears and head east. Ancient India.
Mm.
Our sources suggest things were, well, surprisingly structured over there.
Oh, definitely. If you look at texts like the Arthashastra, it's this incredible ancient Indian treatise on statecraft, kind of like India's The Prince by Machiavelli, but much older.
Right.
It details a really sophisticated system for diplomacy. It even breaks down diplomats into 3 distinct types.
3 types back then. What did they do?
So first, you had plenipotentiaries. These guys had full power, full authority to negotiate and seal deals.
Okay, the top negotiators.
Then you had envoys sent out for just one specific mission, more limited scope. And third, royal messengers. Their main job was just carrying information back and forth.
That level of specialization is pretty amazing for the time, and I think I read something about spies being part of the system too.
You did. The Arthashastra talks about 2 kinds of spies. Some were for intelligence gathering, finding out what rivals were up to, the usual stuff.
Uh-huh.
But others were actually tasked with subversion, covert actions. It shows a pretty deep understanding of the, let's say, less visible tools of statecraft.
Wow. So it sounds like a very complete, almost modern view of international relations, were there rules for how these diplomats should behave, how they were treated?
Yes, and that's really interesting. The text lays out detailed rules about diplomatic immunity and privileges, things we still grapple with
Oh, that's
today.
good.
Yeah. And procedures for starting and ending missions, how to select envoys, what their duties were. It wasn't haphazard. It's just a very organized, regulated way of managing interactions between different kingdoms or powers.
Okay, let's circle back to the ancient Near East. Treaties and alliances. The sources mention some really concrete examples that show these practices unfolding.
Absolutely. There's a fascinating one from Kultepe in modern-day Turkey, an ancient trading center. It's an oath ritual between merchants from Assur and a local Anatolian ruler.
An oath ritual, not just a document.
Right. It wasn't just about, tariffs and protecting merchants, though it covered that. The core was this powerful oath sworn before major gods Assur, the storm god, the earth.
Sounds intense, designed to be taken seriously.
Oh, absolutely. It involves symbolic acts, straddling furniture, pouring liquids from special cups and cauldrons, and the language. There's a line that basically says, if we break this oath, may our blood be spilled just like the liquid in this cup.
Whoa. That really hammers home the commitment. Divine oaths, symbols.
It shows how crucial that religious sacred element was back then. It wasn't just a business deal. It was a binding commitment, invoking the highest powers they knew. Very different feel from today's treaty signings.
Definitely. What else? Any other key treaties?
Well, there's one between Hammurabi again, and another ruler, Zimri Lim of Mari.
Okay.
This is a straight-up alliance for mutual defense. They teamed up against a common enemy, a ruler from Elam. It clearly shows that forming coalitions, collective security, these are ancient strategies.
So the enemy of my enemy is my friend is a very old idea.
As old as the hills, it seems.
Yeah.
And then probably the most famous one is the peace treaty between Ramses II of Egypt and Hattusili III of the Hittites around the 13th century BC.
Yes, the Battle of Kadesh Treaty, right?
That's the one. It's remarkable because it explicitly talks about lasting peace. Phrases like good peace and good amity and good fraternity between the kings and their sons and grandsons forever. It was a non-aggression pact designed to stabilize relations between these two superpowers.
And the language they use towards each other, calling each other brother.
Exactly. Great king, my brother. It suggests, on the surface at least, a relationship of equals. Parity diplomacy.
But was it really equal?
Well, that's the thing. Probably not always in practice. Egypt often controlled more resources, especially gold and fancy goods. So the Egyptian pharaoh could often, pull rank or extract concessions. We see hints of this in things like the Amarna letters from a bit earlier.
The Amarna letters.
Yeah, they're this amazing archive of diplomatic correspondence, mostly sent to Egypt. They show these intricate relationships, requests for gold, maneuvering. So the brother language was important, it set a tone, but power realities still mattered. A lot.
Interesting tension there. Okay, let's move forward a bit in time. Medieval Europe. The sources talk about early forms of diplomatic representation, like the nuncius. What was that about?
Right, the nuncius. In the early medieval period, this was basically a messenger, a channel of communication between rulers. They go back and forth, maybe exploring potential alliances or treaties.
Just a messenger, though.
Primarily. But what's really interesting is the immunity they often had.
Ah, diplomatic immunity.
Yeah.
So it goes way back. How did it work then?
It often had a religious basis. The nuncius was seen as so closely linked to their ruler, their principal, that harming the nuncius was like harming the ruler directly. Sometimes they even carried special staffs, maybe consecrated staffs, as a symbol of their protection, like a divine shield almost.
A sacred messenger, untouchable. But that system changed.
It had to, really.
Yeah.
As interactions got more complex, more frequent, just sending messages back and forth was too slow, too cumbersome. So you see the rise of the procurator.
Procurator. Sounds more official.
It was. These officials had much more power. They weren't just messengers. They could represent their ruler more fully, negotiate directly.
What could they do that a nuncius couldn't?
Crucially, they were often given plena potestas full power. That meant they could actually enter into contracts, make binding agreements on behalf of their ruler. Big step up in authority.
So they could actually sign deals.
Yes, though it wasn't always smooth sailing. You do find cases where a ruler back home would say, nope, my procurator went too far, and refuse to honor the agreement. Or they'd just withdraw the mandate. So there was still that link back to the principle.
And I remember reading, they could even conduct marriages by proxy.
Isn't that wild? It really shows the level of trust and delegated authority. standing in for the king or queen at the altar.
Incredible. And alongside this, there was another system developing related to trade, consuls.
Exactly, driven by commerce. Especially the Italian city-states, French cities. Their merchants trading across the Mediterranean needed someone on the ground in foreign ports.
To look after their interests.
Right. So merchants started electing consuls in places like Tyre. Beirut, Marseille did this back in 1223. These consuls would supervise trade, settle disputes among their own merchants.
Like a local governor for the merchant community.
Sort of. And later, you get the capitulations treaties, especially with the Ottoman Empire. These gave European consuls even more power, sometimes including legal jurisdiction over their own nationals abroad. So, two tracks developing. The political diplomacy with nuntii and procurators, and this commercial diplomacy with consuls.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground, from Mesopotamia to medieval Europe. Let's try to pull some threads together. What are the big lessons from all this ancient stuff that still, matter today?
Well, one clear takeaway is the absolute need for clear communication, just like Hammurabi trying to make his laws understood. In modern diplomacy, that echoes in the need for transparency, for clear agreements.
Though transparency can be tricky, right? Like after World War I, Wilson wanted open diplomacy, but negotiating in public.
Exactly. There's always that tension, isn't there, between being open and being, well, effective in negotiations. It's a perennial dilemma. But the principle of clarity that Hammurabi grasped is fundamental.
What about the structures, those specialized diplomats in ancient India? Does that connect?
Oh, absolutely. Think about modern foreign ministries or international organizations. You have ambassadors with broad mandates, special envoys for specific crises or topics, technical experts, consular staff. It's a highly specialized. That Indian model, with its plenipotentiaries, single mission envoys, it's an early version of that same need for specialized roles.
Makes sense. And treaties, alliances,
Yeah.
obviously still huge today.
Totally central. The rituals have changed, definitely. We don't usually spill liquids while invoking storm gods anymore.
Probably for the best.
Probably. But the core function, making formal pacts, defining relationships, ensuring security, regulating how states interact, that's as vital now as it was for Ramses and Hattusili.
And finally, immunity. From those sacred nuntii onwards, that laid the groundwork for modern diplomatic law.
Without question. The reasons why diplomats get immunity have evolved. It's less about sacred status now and more about functional necessity, ensuring they can do their jobs without interference. But the basic idea that envoys need protection to facilitate communication between states, that thread runs right through history, leading directly to things like the Vienna Convention today.
It really is striking how deep these roots go. So, wrapping up this deep dive, what's the main thing you think we should take away?
I think the core message is that even though the world looks vastly different, technology, speed, global scale, the fundamental challenges of getting along, managing power, communicating effectively between different groups, those haven't changed nearly as much as you might think. Ancient diplomacy shows us the same human dynamics at play: trust, suspicion, ambition, the need for rules. It's all there.
So understanding the past really does illuminate the present. Okay, so here's a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on. In our hyper-connected, complex world, so different from the ancient Near East, which of these ancient diplomatic principles do you think have truly lasted? And which ones feel completely transformed? How do those old dynamics of trust, power, and communication still play out on the global stage today?
Yeah, it's worth thinking about, maybe even digging a bit deeper into the history of diplomacy yourself. You might find more connections than you expect between their world and ours.